welcome. We've got people from Sheffield here. I think we've got people. Well, I know we've got people from Rotherham and Barnsley. We've maybe got people from North Derbyshire, and we may have some people from the East Midlands. So welcome to you all. Some people will be joining us a little bit later because there's been just one or two technical hitches, I think, which we're gradually overcoming. Before I ask Vera to just make a few opening remarks, can I just say one or two things about protocol to make the evening run smoothly? At the moment, everybody's on mute. If you use the chat facility, so I hope you've all used the chat facility before, you'll find it down at the bottom in the middle. You can actually ask a question there, so I'll try and spot the questions as they come up. I'll take questions about leadership first before Vera's sort of areas of responsibility in terms of that she's the spokesperson for the party on. So I'll take leadership questions first. Where there are questions similar, I'll probably take 2 or 3 questions together, and I'll actually ask you to ask your question in person. So can you unmute yourself, ask your question, and then put yourself back on mute, okay? We'll try and get through as many as we can, make it as informal as we can. Is that okay with everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, fine. Okay, so welcome to Sheffield, Vera. And it's over to you then to make a few opening remarks.
Well, first of all, a big thank you to all of you for inviting me, because this is my first virtual tour to Sheffield. So it is very much a new thing for me as well. We also had a new thing today in Parliament. I'm back in London because we had to go and physically vote in a very, very long queue. And that was such a chaos and disaster. I think this experiment, this first new thing of my virtual tour, is going to go much more smoothly and will be a much happier experience. So thank you again for all being in the room. I believe very much in Liberal Democrats Without Borders, so it's great that you have sort of come together from different local areas. I understand there's Sheffield and Barnsley, and there is Rochdale and Rotherham. So welcome everybody, and thank you for having this hour and a half with me together. I hope we can very much discuss about the future of the party and where I think it should go, but also very much your local future, where I think that should go. I'm going to stand for the leadership. I'm inviting you now, but it will probably come up, to visit my website, werahobhouse.org. You'll find that I'll add new bits on a weekly basis of what I think on areas like the climate emergency or a progressive alliance or proportional representation. So please take the opportunity to go and see what I'm saying on all these areas, and possibly the bits that we are not going to cover tonight. At the center of why and where I'm standing is, I believe that the Liberal Democrats need to be with both feet firmly in the center left. I believe we are not somewhere between the right and the left. We should be confidently fighting our values and standing up for what we believe in with both feet in the center left. And I believe in the 21st century, the threat to liberalism comes from the right. Now, a progressive alliance or a center-left alliance is not something that is new. Paddy Ashton and Charlie Kennedy have very much stood on that ticket, and really it represented where we politically did best when in terms of council seats, in terms of parliamentary seats. So it's as such not a new idea. But of course, you know, this is now 25 years ago, and being progressive, or in the progressive center left, means something different now in 2020. And what that is, I think, would be very much the discussion that I hope we are going to have now and through the leadership campaign. And I personally think at the heart of how we can answer that question is very much how we respond to the climate emergency. The climate emergency is one of the biggest global issues, And we as Liberal Democrats have always been environmentalists, but why are we actually so passionate to address the climate emergency? And I believe that is because the climate emergency will create huge global inequalities, and our fight for social justice across the globe it is very much at the heart of our Liberal Democrat values. But of course, it also means that nationally, here in this country, we need to make sure addressing the climate emergency and really creating something of a new order of how we live our lives has to be done justly. It has to be socially just. So that there are already two very important things where I think we Liberal Democrats are. And actually, I don't think we should be afraid of being in the centre left. I think we are very different from other parties in the centre left. The Labour Party and the Green Party stand with us on social justice. They stand with us in many ways on how to address the climate emergency. But how we are doing these things, we are very different. First of all, we believe in enterprise and business. We believe that we should harness business for new ideas, for research, for providing the solutions. We are not ideologically fixed about who should provide the answers, as long as it's open, transparent, and evidence-based. We believe in market mechanism to create incentives and disincentives, and we believe, and here we are very different from the Conservatives, we believe in state regulation and making sure that we have state interventions in order to guide us towards where we need to go. We shouldn't be afraid being very different from the Labour Party, because we are rooted in civil liberties. We don't believe in authoritarianism. And last but not least, we are community activists. I always find the Labour Party talks a very good talk on grassroots and local communities and all that, but really they're a very centrist party. They don't really believe, like we believe passionately, in local democracy and local communities. And that's really where I think the discussion tonight will come from, because you're fighting Labour, you're not fighting Conservatives. A lot of seats in the Southwest and in the South are against Conservatives, you're fighting Labour. But don't be afraid of fighting, the good fight from the progressive left. These are the sort of basic ideas that I'm putting out there. The local election, the general election review has very much brought out where we win is where we have a record of winning, but also where we have prepared the ground from the grassroots up. And I think both of that is definitely true in Sheffield and in the areas across the Northwest, the Northeast, the Midlands, where we have done well and where our activism lies and where we can win. So I'm looking forward to your questions. They can be very difficult questions. I'm happy to go out to that challenge, but I hope that together we are formulating some ideas tonight how we can win. Over to you. You have to unmute yourself, John. John?
To help me know the protocols as well. Right, so I've unmuted myself. Please do send me your questions. I have got two, so at least we don't have a silence whilst we're waiting for questions. They're both related to aspects of a progressive alliance. So I'm going to ask Laura and then Billy if they both unmute themselves, and if they both ask their questions, and then perhaps you could address both questions, because they're really the same area. Okay, so Laura first, if you're there.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Vera, and thank you for visiting us. And I hope that the farce that we saw in Parliament today is brought to something a little bit more sensible soon. So my question is that I think anyone that has campaigned in Sheffield or Barnsley or Rotherham or pretty much anywhere else where we're campaigning against Labour will know the extreme levels of hatred and animosity which many in the Labour Party feel towards the Liberal Democrats, and they make that very, very clear abundantly. And I guess my question is, you've talked a lot about how you want to work with the Labour Party, but I mean, what do you feel that the Labour Party wants to work with us? And if not, how would you overcome that?
Before you answer, Vera, if Billy, do you want to put your question as well?
Hi Vera. My question is basically, as your pitch is about abandoning the equidistance between Labour and the Conservatives, How do you see us cutting through people voting for us ahead of Labour if we're planning on sort of making ourselves the social liberal party? How do we get people to vote for us over instead of Labour, for instance?
Right. Well, thank you for that, Laura. First of all, great to see you, although in a virtual space. So close, so annoying that we didn't quite make it. But I mean, I really believe that there's everything to go for, and this is of course exactly going straight into your question. First of all, does the Labour Party want to work with us? First of all, I talked to John a little bit before this meeting. My political past is from Rochdale. I did 10 years of local government in Rochdale, and we were always up against Labour. And I absolutely know the vitriol, the nastiness of the Labour Party at a local level, and how difficult it was to work with them. And so, of course, you have to defeat them, and once you are in that competition, in that fight, then they become very disagreeable. Trust me, the Tories, where you fight the Tories, are very disagreeable. So locally, of course, you have to be the party that persuades the electorate that you are the better party to back. And that is exactly through the issues that I've sort of already addressed. We are often far more reasonable. We are far more we are the people who come with evidence-based solutions. So when you're campaigning, bring out the nastiness and the unreasonableness of local campaigning of the Labour Party. But generally, at a national level, it has been like this, that when we are doing well when the Labour Party is doing well. And the Labour Party has always been greatly shocked by the latest election results. I mean, they thought they can win by campaigning the way they did. They knew it didn't work. They too have had a massive wake-up call, and they understand that we need to somewhat work together in order to defeat the Tories. And so, do they want to work with us? Well, where we are competing with each other at a local level, of course you can't work with them. That's understood. But on the bigger national picture, they have understood, and Keir Starmer is obviously an obvious expression of that. It's a Labour Party that's gone towards the centre again, because really the Corbyn experiment has completely collapsed. And the Labour Party has also understood that they cannot win on their own, so they need to win with us. But that means that in certain areas we can, I'm not talking about standing down. I don't think that's ever going to happen with the Labour Party, and I don't think it would be popular with the electorate. But there can be more informal arrangements where we are in second place. We do the hard campaigning, and where the Labour Party is in second place, the Labour does the hard campaigning. And then there are areas like Sheffield where we have to defeat the Labour Party. But as I say, we ultimately, I believe areas like Sheffield, but the whole country is ultimately progressive. It's devastating to see that we've lurched into this right as a country. And I put that down on our rubbish voting system. But actually, the sentiment of this country is to be progressive. So why do we have a right-wing government? So really to appeal to the progressive left, I think we have to continue to do, and you have to do that in your area too, but to show at a local level that just you do it better. You're the better campaigner. You're the better local councillor. If you have local elections, we can demonstrate time and again we are just so much better at passionately believing in exercising local democracy. So I think that's how we win and how we prepare the grounds. I don't know whether you've got local elections next year, but these are the springboards of making sure we win. We win. Step after step. It is not, we never win out of the blue, and build the ground from the grassroots up towards taking the seat as we deserve. And Billy, the same thing. It's winning the argument from very, very sort of simple from very simple issues on the ground, where we can actually do something. We get stuff done. We can demonstrate to local people that we mean delivering things, and we're not just talking the talk.
Okay, Colin Ross is next to ask a question.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Fat finger syndrome. I turned my video off as well as unmuted myself at the same time. Actually, following on a little bit from what you were just saying about campaigning and elections, in Sheffield, Hallam, we've had obviously the bitter disappointment of the 2019 election results, and we read with interest the report just released on it, which actually was quite stark, and it's what we've perhaps been saying in Sheffield for a long time about the discoordination between local campaigns and the national campaigns. And the report highlighted in many ways many structural deficiencies within the party and shortcomings. So my question to you is, how would you address these fundamental problems that clearly exist that actually got in the way of us electing more MPs, and certainly one in Sheffield Hallam in 2019?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. Actually, your question reminded me that typically, like politicians do, Billy, I didn't really ask you a question about equidistance, so let me come back to the question on equidistance. I think the election result, the election review had one very clear outcome, and that was that we didn't really want to nail ourselves down with either one or the other. We had two options, and we sat on the fence. We could have either acknowledged that Brexit was going to happen, or we were going to fight Brexit, and then we had to understand that we could only do that by doing something together with the Labour Party, and we did neither. And we fell through the gaps. And I think that is, to me, one of the biggest learnings. And it is always something that we need to remind ourselves. Politics is sometimes about hard choices. And I think the biggest mistake we made in the 2019 election was we didn't make that choice. And the hard choices have to be discussed. And as I say, in my view, you could call it a hard choice. But if you look back at the way we have won elections, it's usually because we are a progressive centre-left party. We do it when this mood of the country swings to progressive values again. And but one size doesn't fit all, and that is the other learning from the election review. That we need to understand that we should have the freedoms to much more formulate and design our own local campaigns. One size doesn't fit all. While the big picture of, let's say, progressive and progressive values is where I think it can fit us all, what we then do with that on the ground has to be something that is not designed from the centre and from London and from HQ, where we get hundreds of election literature that puts, I mean, in my case, I'm sure you got the same stuff, you know, Boris Johnson on one hand, Jeremy Corbyn on the other hand, and then and Joe in the middle, which caused me great problems in Bath. A, because a lot of people thought we were going back into a coalition, which was the one thing that they didn't want to have in Bath. But on the other hand, because we had so much literature from the top, from the centre, my local deliverers didn't want to deliver my lovely designed, colourful leaflets about what I had done, why, you know, what made me successful in Bath and all the rest of it. And those are, time and again, the very frustrating feedbacks that we get from local parties that ultimately, if you're a target scene, HQ takes over, runs your campaign, and you have no say in it anymore. That must stop. That must stop. We need to have much more freedoms to make sure we are running our own campaigns, and where people understand when they want Laura to win, why they want Laura to win, not just Joe Swinson as the next Prime Minister. You know, these are the things where I think we have made big mistakes, and where the party structurally needs to put a process in place where we are empowering local areas to design their own campaigns, because you know your area, you know a particular issue that's coming up, be that a waste incinerator or be that a local hospital or whatever it is, because that's how we win. You need to unmute yourself, John.
Right, I've unmuted myself. I'll get there. Practice makes perfect. I always was a slow learner. We've got quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and see if we can get through them. So thank you to everybody who sent me your questions. I've got a list of people, so I'll try and call people in order. Ben Noble next.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, I'm just trying to remember what my question was because I've been reading the other ones. But yeah, so I guess my question was sort of down to a sort of classic one that Liberal Democrats love to talk about, but perhaps people don't appreciate is as you previously mentioned, one of the things that makes us different is we suggest things better because principally we believe in constitutional change, and yet I feel that if you talk to the sort of average voter, it's not something they appreciate that we stand for. Or even are particularly aware of. And when I talk about constitutional change, I'm talking about things like electoral reform and devolution, both things that we're very strong on, but maybe other people don't realise. So I guess my question was, what role do you feel that has, the Liberal Democrat positions on constitutional reform and devolution, electoral reform? What role do you feel that has in the Liberal Democrat message going forward from here?
There are always the things that are really important, and then there are the things, and we should campaign on them, and we campaign on them, and hopefully we will campaign on the climate emergency, and we will campaign on, for example, what I believe we need a lot more social homes for rent, the social justice agenda, and all of that. And then there are issues that are slightly more hidden, although they make a big difference, but it's very difficult to campaign on them. And those are the issues of proportional representation, for example, or constitutional reform. And they matter. They matter to us, and they matter also to the future. So I joined the Electoral Reform Society after we had our heavy election defeat in 2015. And I believe at the center of our rotten British politics is a rotten voting system. So yes, I campaign with Make Votes Matter and with the Electoral Reform Society on again building alliances to get electoral reform, because I think it's part of very much a progressive agenda and a better political future for this country. But is that something that we can easily stick into a leaflet? Probably not. So the things that we stick in our leaflets are the things that people understand. The things that people see. Look at the Dominic Cummings issue. Yeah, suddenly people could relate to that. So when I was putting out there on the Saturday when the story first broke, Dominic Cummings needs to go. Suddenly, a lot of people could resonate with that because they had been staying at home, and there's somebody who thinks you can just break the law. So when we pick issues we campaign on, we always have to go back to what people feel like. So when we campaign on the climate emergency, it's often a bit of an issue because it seems to be something that people can't touch. So I'm trying to campaign on things like, for example, home insulation or fuel poverty, where people can directly relate to it rather than the big theoretical things of whether we should have green hydrogen or hydrogen from natural gas or all these sort of things. So while I believe we should, of course, talk about rotten politics and what is wrong about the way we do politics, we have to fight our fights around proportional representation, for example, more in the background. So one of the things that the Electoral Reform Society tried to do 3-4 years ago is get the same manifesto commitment from the Labour Party, the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats about proportional representation, not via a referendum, but via an act of parliament. If you get into power, these sort of things can be done a little bit more behind the scenes. Surely we need to talk about it, we need to campaign about it, but it's possibly not an issue for your next focus leaflet.
Thank you, Vera. The next person, Kevin Oxley.
Thank you, John.
Oh, can I say one more thing about these? If you know what, one of the things that I did for a long time when I was in public meetings, and you know, it ultimately always came about rotten politics and all the rest of it. And they said, look, if you don't want to join a political party, join either you know, the campaign organizations Make Votes Matter or the Electoral Reform Society. It's one of the things where you can encourage people to join an organization, and through that membership, you know, the group of supporters and campaigners on the issue will grow. So sorry that I interrupted the question.
That's all right. Thank you, John. Hello, Vera. What difference will you make as leader, and why should we support you from the other candidates who may be standing in this election?
Well, first of all, because I think I've got some very firm policy beliefs. And as a person, if you know me, fine. If you don't know me, I tell you now, I run with stuff. You know, I get passionate about, let's say, I was one of the most passionate pro-European campaigners in Bath, and I set up Bath for Europe. I was 2 days after the referendum result, I was out there in the streets of Bath and said, I'm not going to take this lying down. And I was a passionate pro-European campaigner. I'm a passionate climate campaigner. I believe in campaigning, and I believe that I'm not worried about ruffling feathers. I'm basically what is on the tin. I run with issues, I think, that at the core of what Liberals believe in. I have been, my background is from local government. I think both the other candidates that we think are now going to stand in the leadership elections haven't come through local government. I think it's a vital experience. I've done 10 years of local government. We took control of Rochdale Council in 2006 and we lost it in 2010. I also think because I have got experience from the north of England, and now I'm the MP for Bath, it gives me a sort of bigger breadth. I feel that I can possibly understand much better, you know, how local areas want to campaign on their own things rather than being dominated by the centre. As I say, I'm also passionately believing in the social justice agenda and the local democracy agenda. So I think that my other colleagues don't quite understand the vital importance of local government. I find it miserable, and again, one of our democratic deficits is from a setup of British politics where we've got the central government, national government is the thing that's very important, and then local government is always something that's a bit secondary. And I remember my anger in 2010 when we said, for the first time in 70 years, we are in government. And I thought, what? We've been running the council, big job. And what people experience of democracy is often what is delivered at local level, is local services. Those sort of things are what I will exclusively campaign on, other than the other people who are standing. So if you believe in local democracy, grassroots politics, if you believe in that we should be uncompromising about tackling the climate emergency, and if you still think that we shouldn't give up our hope that one day we are a member of the European Union again, back me.
Okay, thank you. We did have a small number of questions submitted in advance as well. So I'm just going to call one of those now, and I will slip the other two in as well. So those people who did send me questions in advance, they will be asked. So the first one is there. Is Peter there? Peter Styring? No. Okay. Well, we'll go on to somebody who is here, and if there's still space, I'll ask his question later. Okay. So the next one is Damien. The first question, which is really a question about the present situation, but implications for the future as well. Damien, would you ask your first question?
Does he have to unmute himself?
Yeah, Damien, could you unmute yourself?
Struggling with the camera, but can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So my question was around the NHS. The current coronavirus crisis has highlighted how severely under-resourced the NHS and public health system is compared to other European countries' healthcare systems, both in actual monetary resourcing and staff levels. So apart from just pouring money into the service, how do you think we can solve this?
Very interesting question, and I have to admit that the NHS itself, because it is such a complicated and complex body, is in its structures not necessarily my strength, and that where I can talk about with confidence. And I'm saying that, you know, I've not been a nurse or a doctor. I was a teacher, so I think I understand schools and the whole way that secondary schools are organized, and exams and exam boards and all that sort of stuff I can talk about. But about the internal structures of the NHS, I find it often very difficult to make my way through it. And I'm saying that because I'm particularly interested in mental health. I'm now the chair of the APPG on eating disorders, which I've set up, and I'm trying to make my way through the different responsible bodies within the NHS that are responsible for delivery, but also for exams and for policy, and it is a very, very, very complex body, you know, I'm happy to have a discussion if there are experts on here tonight, whether they have got a particular proposal for it. What I would say generally is that from what I have experienced from the health service as an outsider, and I was the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for Health in Rochdale in 2009, was that it keeps going round in organizational circles. So the Lib Dems in 2010 stood on a ticket of abolishing the strategic health authorities and the PCTs, and giving local doctors and GPs much more power to hold budgets. And then very quickly the doctors found out that actually they want to be doctors rather than managers, and then they formed the CCGs. And if you're looking at what happens now, is that the CCGs are becoming bigger and bigger bodies, and we are more or less going back into something that resembles our primary care trust and strategic health authorities. So the organization of a national body, and the NHS is a treasure, is a huge issue. And if it was easy, then I'm sure people who are better paid than me and know the system better would have found a solution. The question is really, do we want a system that is so centralized, and do we want a system that's ultimately a fully public service? And I think ultimately the question, the answer to the second question is absolutely. It's one of the last bits in British society that is a public service, and through the latest coronavirus crisis, we know how much people appreciate the NHS, because there is, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. So so I think we should value the NHS as a public body. We should support it with a lot more money. Of course, money is not the only thing, but money is at the bottom of a lot of the problems. And another thought is that the NHS was set up after the Second World War as something that was addressing completely different health problems. So most of it was about you know, what's becoming a problem now again, infectious disease. Somebody needed to go into hospital, was either better after 2 weeks or had sadly died. Whereas now we are dealing with a population of the long-term unwell. We are also having an aging population. So the whole issue about health and social care and how it's integrated, how we are looking at, we as individuals want to make a contribution, possibly a bigger contribution to how our long-term well-being is funded, is a big national debate that governments keep putting off, because it probably will mean that we all need to make bigger contributions into the health system and into social care from a working age onwards, and that is about, you know, how much money we can raise and how are we going to raise the money, and that's probably then sweeping over into what is the acceptable level of tax. The Lib Dems actually had a very interesting proposal of a ring-fence tax, so a tax, a special penny in the pound of income tax, for example, a very progressive tax and very popular, in order to sort of fund the health system and the social care system properly. And those, you know, those are my lines of thought, I think, where we need to go when we talk about the NHS. So yes, it needs more funding, but then where does the funding come from? probably only by raising, money for the public purse, and then we need to get the public buy-in for that. And the structural issues of, how centralized or how devolved the structures of the NHS are going to be. Clearly, somebody who is more knowledgeable about structures in the NHS would have to give me some more ideas.
Okay, thank you. David Watts.
Yeah, thank you very much. David Watts from Rochdale. We were one of the parties that had to stand down at the election. No choice of ours, that was forced on us. But my question is about the next general election. If the result is that there is a hung parliament, would you rule out a coalition with the Tories? And what would your red lines be for doing a deal with Labour?
Interesting question. I mean, if I was the leader of the Liberal Democrats, I would find it very difficult to see how I could ever work with the Tories, because my whole instinct, certainly the Tories as they are now, their systematic destruction of the welfare state, the brutal destruction of the welfare state, the destruction of local government, Brexit, the way they're handling the coronavirus crisis now, I find it very difficult how there's any sort of gaps that can be bridged, certainly not in 2 weeks of coalition talks. I mean, I find that very, very difficult in the hung parliament to come down on the Tory side. I know in 2010 the difficulty was that this number simply didn't make up, didn't come together. Also, actually, a tired Labour Party didn't want to take didn't want to go into government. That would be very, very different. We are now having a Labour government that is wanting to go into government again. And so it will be much easier to negotiate and find similarities and common values, as I've already said, with the Labour Party. But, we talked earlier about electoral reform. I'd say that must absolutely be at the bottom of our demands. Proportional representation is something that we, as a third party, is always losing out. In a first past the post system is definitely one of the big things. But otherwise, whatever is going to emerge during the campaign, or for example, how we tackle the climate emergency, for me, it is very important to see that a Labour Party is absolutely uncompromising about getting to net zero. We have set a date of 2045. The Labour Party has said 2030, although a little bit half-baked, because really they can't evidence we can with our plan how we can actually get to net zero in 2045. So agreements on how we tackle the climate emergency, yes, electoral reform, these are the sort of issues where I'm sure we can find common ground. I know, and I worked with the Labour Party together on building a lot more social homes for rent. So if we're looking at what is really stretching household incomes, it's always the cost of housing. And the private sector is absolutely not delivering the social homes for rent that we need. Social housing on a big scale, like we saw after the Second World War, it's one of the big things that I would like to see delivered. I know, for example, that the Labour Party is committed to that, but these big ideas, the big tickets, and then yes, I mean, I would like to see a Labour Party that also understands that our heart should beat at the heart of the European project, and we should never give up our ambition to, at some point, not tomorrow, not in 2 years' time, but not to give up the hope that we will at some point be a member of the European Union again. And I'm saying that because I had a long talk with the Swiss ambassador during the autumn conference, actually, and he said the Swiss in the 1990s, they decided that they didn't want to become members of the European Union. And since then, they're hanging around there with bilateral agreements because no big party has for over 20 years allowed themselves to actually raise, should we actually look again, whether membership of the European Union would make a lot more sense. And those of us who have passionately campaigned to stop Brexit, not just because it was something to campaign on, but because it's going to be so damaging for our long-term future, I think we Liberal Democrats should also be a party who keeps at least in the long, for the long-term future, that dream of European membership alive, and not let's just let it drop because we are sort of embarrassed that we didn't win a majority for it. I'm not in politics to do the easy stuff. I've always been in politics to recognize that some stuff is difficult, but if it's the right thing to do, we should never stop fighting for it. So yeah, I mean, the Labour Party should also come around at some point around that. I would certainly say tackling the climate emergency, but yes, constitutional and electoral reform would be a red line for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Sophie Thornton. She's had to leave, but I actually think it's an important area she raises. A question was, how do you see us cutting through with young people going forward? How would you engage with them, and what issues do you see as important?
Well, actually, historically, up to the coalition years and tuition fees, we actually were very successful with young people, because where we were cutting through was certainly on education, was certainly on all the equality legislation. So now it's very much on gender issues. It's very much on equality issues. This is where I think we as Liberal Democrats are actually becoming popular again. And of course we were, with the young people, very popular on Europe. And I know in the north and in northwest and northeast, it's more of a tricky issue to be pro-European. But actually, if you're asking why young people voted for us, they voted for us because they themselves see themselves in a global, truly global Britain, and an international Britain that looks at Europe not as a sort of enemy that you want to shut yourself off from, but the opportunities where their life can go, where they naturally travel to without needing a visa, where they don't need driving, a special permission to drive on the European roads. I mean, this ease in which young people have learned to travel and now suddenly probably in the future can't. I'd say being pro-European is probably still something that resonates very much with young people, but we have always been the party of the strongest defenders of minority rights. Currently, one of the most vulnerable minority groups are transgender people, and we have always been the ones who've picked up these issues and run with them. Sometimes people have seen us as a little bit quirky and unlucky, but actually these niche issues become big issues, and we have had the cut through on these issues like equal marriage, and now I think it's on transgender rights, and those sort of things where we keep running. And the bigger things are definitely on education, on the best education that young people can get, and Vince had interesting ideas about lifelong learning, about learning budgets, where people can actually make their individual decisions of where they want to go with their education, whether they want to work and then go back into education. These are flexible ways of working. And then, of course, the big issues about artificial intelligence. Joe had a lot of interesting stuff to say on these. So there's plenty, particularly because we are a colourful party. We are allowing new ideas. We welcome new ideas, even if they are seem a little bit quirky. But that's why I love my party, because we quite happily embrace people who are not mainstream, who are not coming to us through a long political career path, who don't have to be doing their job on the shop floor through unions to become and stand for parliament, where people come from all walks of life with their ideas, with their backgrounds, with their pragmatic ways of thinking how we can solve an issue. That's why we are Lib Dems, and that's why I love my party. And that's why I think we should be attractive ultimately to people of all generations. And we will get the young people back.
Thank you very much for that, Wera. Ty Reagan.
Hi, sorry about that, struggling to unmute myself. Hi Wera, as leader, how would you approach the challenge of bringing our policies to the fore when the media is very much focused on the promotion or denigration of populist personalities?
So obviously the mainstream media has been a big issue for us. But I would say where, certainly in the last year, where we picked an issue and passionately campaigned for it, although it went pear-shaped in the 2019 election. But, you know, let's look at where we were last year. We were doing well. We were riding in the polls. We won a big way in the European elections in Bath. We had local elections in May. You know, we swept the board. So where you had local elections, you probably also did well. And that was because we were clear about one particular issue. It turned out to be the way we fought it in the general election, not the one that was our big general election winner. But as an issue, it brought us back into the forefront of British politics. We were back in the game, and I believe that we always have these opportunities, and we can't easily blame the media for not wanting to represent us. It's much more us really finding the issues where we relate to people and people relate with our campaigns. But away from the sort of traditional print press and traditional media, actually the party is very keen in making us the best on social media platforms and in campaigning in the European election. Again, I think we were the best on social media campaigning, again, because actually we are embracing new ideas. We are happy with new technology. We feel quite comfortable trying things out. And so I'd say the challenge for us is to have a fabulous a social media offer and do well on social media when we campaign. We can do a lot better. I mean, I never think the leaflet is something that we should abandon. I still believe in the leaflet, but quite a lot of our campaigning should probably migrate online. And once you've cracked that, once you've cracked online campaigning and online getting your message across on online platforms, interestingly, you know, the rest of the media then follows you too. So there are lots of opportunities, and I'd say particularly for us in the new media forms, social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm sure there will be new stuff will be around very soon. And actually the party, that's one of the things that also came out of the election review. The party is very committed to that. So watch this space.
Okay, thank you. Raj, are you there? Your question next.
Yes, I am. Hi, Vera. And so you talked about a couple of things in your opening remarks as planks of your leadership campaign. So you talked about the climate emergency, which obviously fits with your portfolio as a spokesperson for the party. You talked about being a progressive left candidate, and you also talked about local democracy and community politics. I guess my question is that as a party, it's very difficult for us to get airtime, and when we do, it's important that we essentially have one message that gets through, lest the one thing we want to say becomes diluted. So what of those three general election?
I couldn't quite hear the question. Did anybody else get that? John, did you hear what the question was? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I can read it out for you, okay?
Yeah,
can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay. What I was just saying was you mentioned the climate emergency being a progressive left party, but also talked about community politics. Liberal Democrats at best are able to get one message through. Which of those do you think is likely to be most effective?
So when I say that I'm somebody who passionately believes in local democracy, that's not necessarily something that will then become a general election motto. One of the things that I think relates to local democracy is what I keep saying, the ruthless destruction of the welfare state by the Tories. That's how I would possibly tie that in with a local message. And that is most evident in how people, you know, our councils are a shadow of what they were and what they deliver compared to what I was used to from 2004 onwards. We don't have local education authorities anymore. Everything is now done through academies and academy trusts, and we don't have the local oversight of that. You know, the health system is a little bit the same. So there are plenty and plenty of examples where basically local democracy, local accountability has been completely destroyed by the Tories who want to leave everything to the market and the private sector. So, you know, if you wish, my local democracy message could be tied in with that. But when I talk that I, you know, as a leader, I would, you know, one of my pillars is local councils, local democracy and grassroots campaigning, is that, you know, we don't only have general elections, we have got loads and loads of local elections, and how a leader actually supports local elections and how we, for example, devolve resources from the centre to our local areas and decision making, whether that be for campaigning, but also how we make the case of how local councils are being stifled by centralisation of decision making. The only thing where local councils are still decision makers are in planning, and even there, a lot of our ability to, for example, address the climate emergency very quickly runs into issues of planning regulations. And although we are local planning authorities, it is national planning law that stops us from doing the stuff that we want to do. So again, it's not necessarily something I stick on my leaflet when it comes to a general election campaign. But as you know, if you want to understand where I come from and where I want the party to go long term, I believe we need to value local democracy, local decision making, local activism, and enable that at local level, and for local parties to shape their own futures. That's of course not something that I then stick into a general election campaign. But what is going to come out in 2024? Let's wait and see. Are we still actually milling over the hangover of the corona crisis? Is it the climate emergency? I personally want to absolutely uncompromisingly campaign on the climate emergency and how we tackle that. But it will obviously depend a little bit on what in 2024, if that's when we have the next general election, is going to be one of the big issues of the day. When I say I want to be leader, it's not just for the next general election. It's about where I want our party to go in general. And as I say, one of my big themes that would cut, you know, would follow through wherever we campaign is definitely the importance of local democracy and local government, the reinstatement of good public services and delivered from local areas with local accountability and local democracy firmly in place. And we can tie that in with the climate emergency as well. You know, I'm doing the climate cluster in Westminster. I'm inviting more and more council leaders and environment leads onto my cluster, because actually what we can currently do, we can deliver the climate emergency or tackling the climate emergency where we are either holding the balance or running district councils or councils, and where we can deliver net zero on the ground in our local areas. I believe in local democracy, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe in the climate emergency. They sort of go together for me.
Okay, thanks, Vera. We did have a number of, I think, 3 questions relating to the climate emergency. I think I did ask earlier if Peter Styring was in, and I think I have seen him now. Present, Peter.
Yeah, I'm here.
Over to you.
Thanks. So, thanks for doing this, Vera. So, in terms of the climate emergency, once we're through COVID and then Brexit, the climate emergency is going to cause far greater problems as a nation and internationally. And I wondered, in your role, either as future leader or in current role, how you're going to tackle our response to the climate emergency. Because I work with the government at the moment, and it's the same old story. We're going to do CCS, which we can't do because it doesn't work very well. We're going to use electric vehicles, which is a red herring because we don't have the energy. What will be the Lib Dem message that really stands out that we are serious about the climate emergency?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, I recommend that everybody reads our excellent 80-page document, but it is readable, about how we get to net zero. Currently, our target is 2045, and that we are cutting most emissions by 2030 and get to net zero by 2045. And there's a very clear pathway. And so the first thing that I was always proud to campaign on, and unfortunately we didn't really campaign on it enough in the general election, is that we Liberal Democrats have a very clear vision of how we get there. And yes, absolutely, the problem is that you know, how we deliver that on the ground without making those who can least afford it pay the highest price. So it has to be a just transition. It has to be led through innovation, absolutely. It has to also be led by local communities and what they can do. And what is the current government currently doing? They're changing the law and say, yeah, we have to get to net zero by 2050. So we change the law, but then there's no pathway, no interim target, nothing where the government can actually be pinned down and say, well, what are we actually doing about this? By the way, I just wanted to say CCS, for those who don't know, carbon capture and storage. The government has got this current thing that carbon capture and storage is the big magic bullet, so we can continue to burn fossil fuels because we can put it back into the ground. Now, that's something that I'm absolutely against and would campaign against. Carbon capture should be reserved for actually what is called negative emissions. We cannot get to net zero without actually taking carbon that is already out there. That's the credit that we've already spent, the things that we have already burned, the CO2, the tons of CO2 that are already in the atmosphere. Those we need to capture and put back into the ground. And without that technology, we will not get to net zero even under our plan. So this is the more technical thing. I know that the government talks a lot about hydrogen. How do we derive, how do we get to hydrogen? There are two ways of getting to hydrogen, either green hydrogen, which is basically renewable energy and electrolysis, or continuing to burn fossil fuels, i.e. extract it from the ground, burn it, and then separate it through a difficult process called steam reformation, and then put the CO2 bit of that process back into the ground, and that's why they want carbon capture and storage. So, you know, and these sort of things are quite technical and difficult, but actually, my main message would always be that the Tories currently, the Tory government, don't really have a plan. We do have a plan. The Tories are not really serious about the climate emergency because really they are patting themselves on the shoulder and ultimately delaying the climate emergency, which is just as bad as actually denying the climate emergency, because if we don't get there by 2050, we've missed the boat and we are ending up with climate chaos. So my message is climate delaying is no better than climate denying. The Tory party is definitely currently delaying the climate emergency because they do not really want to bite the bullet of bringing in a lot of investment, and absolutely it's becoming more and more difficult when after COVID, you know, the government finances are in tatters anyway. So the way we are campaigning about this is saying, don't rebuild the economy just in a rush of rebuilding the economy, but build the economy with the climate emergency in mind, and where we are rebuilding sectors and where we are doing more stuff and where we're investing into the future. It has to be into a net zero future. And for example, you know, what have we been talking about? You know, we have been talking about the aviation industry. Yeah? We're going to have a statement tomorrow about the aviation industry. So yeah, the aviation industry needs to be bailed out. And how are we going to bail out the aviation industry with the climate emergency in mind? Well, my message would be the industry, not individual companies, but the industry needs to be committed to getting to net zero. And that is how the industry actually uses alternatives to jet fuel, synthetic fuels. The mechanism is apparently already there. The government just needs to be serious about putting these mechanisms into place that force the industry to change from fossil fuels, from jet fuel, from kerosene, to synthetic fuels that are net zero. It can be done. it just needs political will that is currently missing.
Peter, do you have a follow-up? Because if you do, there is time. You're on mute, I think, Peter. Okay, we can't hear Peter.
I mean, I can go into a lot of details. For example, you know, if the government thinks our future is hydrogen, first of all, I think it should be green hydrogen. Their project, Scottish Power, is using only renewable energy. So I had a meeting with them that they're actually sort of running a pilot up in the north of Scotland about generating the energy from offshore wind. They're going through the electrolysis. The network for hydrogen gas grid is there. The boilers that need adapting don't actually cost the earth. So there's stuff out there, but the government, for example, has to say we are doing this with green hydrogen. We are doing it the way Scottish Power does it, rather than continuously in Parliament giving me the answer saying green hydrogen is too expensive. No, it isn't. But they're being lobbied by the fossil fuel industry to keep going with natural gas. And then this sort of thing about carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage is expensive anyway. Why invest money in carbon capture and storage if we can invest money into green hydrogen? Yes, it will be more expensive at first, but as we know, market mechanisms very quickly kick in, and it can become a very competitive fuel. Green hydrogen. It's just political will, and it is who the government allows itself to be lobbied by. And you know, we see it in America. You know, where Trump is just he's there because he gets money from the oil companies, and therefore he keeps them going. Those are the political choices that are clearly out there.
Thanks, Vera.
Sorry, can you hear me now, John?
Yes.
Now we can. Do you want to ask one more, and then we've got three
Sorry,
more.
I'm having a few technical problems, but can I say that was the best response I've ever heard from a politician? So Vera really has grasped the nettle on this. For the synthetic aviation fuels, we were just about to put something in production, and we were stopped by COVID. So I had a meeting with Treasury, I had a meeting with a company. I'm quite happy to talk to you offline if that would be.
Please do. I had a very, very interesting meeting yesterday, and I need to sort of get my head around it, but there's a mechanism called the RFTO, the Renewables Fuels, or something like this.
Technical obligation, yeah,
that one. There you go. And that is actually where the government could create a mechanism that forces the industry, you know, gradually to convert to a synthetic fuel. And you know what? For a long time, it needs a new engine, it needs a new plane, it costs billions of pounds. No, it doesn't. No. Apparently, it will increase the cost, but it will increase on average the cost of a ticket of £100 to £160. Well,
if that. So yeah, I was at COP23, I think it was, talking about synthetic aviation fuel. The government is slowly taking it on board, but it's taking a long time. I think this is somewhere, because of the emissions now are so low because of coronavirus, that we have a benchmark to work against. And it's now about putting a new directive in place for the regulation of fuels, not going back to how we were before. And one of the things I've discussed with Bays is a transition away from the £11 billion subsidy of oil and gas into the renewable fuels initiative. And it has to transition. It can't be a sudden cut off. It needs to be a transition. So I'm quite happy to go through that with you once.
Yeah, Peter, please get in touch. I'd be very interested.
Will do. Yeah, thanks. That's been a great response. Thank you.
Unmute yourself, John.
John, the unmute button.
Right. Yeah, I will learn. I was just going to say, you've stopped anyway. I was going to interrupt and say I'll leave you two to converse after further. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Tom Purvis.
Hi. Thanks for doing this. So I work in the British Business Bank, where one of our sort of objectives is to reduce regional imbalances in terms of accessing finance for SMEs. So my question is, how do you propose we grow the cities and towns that have fallen behind a bit in certainly the north of England, but also in certain parts of the rest of the country as well?
Well, I think a lot of the answers there is in reskilling, but also creating a job market that is clearly linked to reskilling and the will to take on people who want to learn, the flexibility of not just having one career and then being stuck with it forever, but a future economy which really much more reflects probably how our future life is going to be, and that is that we are not just stuck with one thing or one career path, but learning and skills-based learning that is much more flexible, but also teaches people much more transferable skills. We've got a great initiative with Bath College, which is a further education college, and Bath Spa University, which is a where they teach a lot of creative arts and creative subjects, and that working together of different levels of education providers. I think we need to invest a lot into education and learning, and people who want to reskill. And I'm not saying that just about young people, that can be at any age. And Vince's idea about this lifelong learning budget. So putting a lot of what we are doing into I call it intellectual, not intellectual property, but our intellectual assets that people actually want to learn, people need to learn, people can learn new skills throughout their lives. And making sure that where we are losing industries like the steel industry or the mining industry or the textile industry, where we then don't leave communities behind, because that's where most of the jobs were, and we can't easily pick up if one sector goes down the tube. So I'm looking at a future much more that looks at a much more flexible labour market, but also a much more flexible, if you wish, education and skills market.
Thank you very much, Wera. If I ask Damien, I know you've already asked one, but you had a question that I think is appropriate to ask, which has got an international dimension as well as relating to things in this country as well. Is Damien still there?
Yep, still here.
Okay, go on, Damien.
While we are all watching with the upsetting scenes unfolding in the United States, and obviously standing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, here in the UK, black and minority ethnic men are still more likely to be stopped and questioned or searched by the police and dealt with more aggressively than white men are, especially in kind of the London area. How do you think we can tackle this within the UK police forces?
So racism is not just a police issue. And I think we have become very complacent about racism. We think we've sort of tackled it, because in every classroom, and I was a secondary school teacher, you know, we stop racism wherever we witness it or something. So we are making these sort of statements, and we think we are not racist. I mean, we are not racist, are we? And actually, I think racism has a much deeper subconscious level that we haven't. We still need to have a national debate about, and we need to talk about it in a much more detail, really. And I had a sort of light bulb moment when I was talking to a young woman of color at Bath Uni about a year ago, and she said, "Oh, Wera, so you're a white woman in Parliament. What's the difference between you being a white woman compared to a black woman?" And you know what? I thought, I don't know. Because what we experience of discrimination, and I have experienced discrimination, we experience with our own skin, literally. So if we really want to understand what discrimination feels like, we need to talk a lot more to the other side. Say, actually, what does that feel like? How do you experience that? And we don't really have these these discussions. So I think the more we are exposed to people from different communities, we are having these discussions more, but there are big areas within Britain that basically are not really exposed to different ethnic minorities. And we really haven't had these detailed and very sensitive discussions that we have to have about racism. We haven't had it out. In America, they still haven't had it out. We still haven't quite understood, if we are white, what it feels like to be black. We don't understand that. We don't understand how that impacts somebody daily in their lives. And so it's not just a police issue. It's something that's endemic in our white communities in Western European countries, because, you know, ultimately that's where our history is. And that's not a condemnation, that's just where it comes. But if we want to create multicultural societies, we need to have deeper, much more deeper under the skin discussions about what it feels like to be from a different background.
Okay, thank you, Vera. We've got time for just 2 more questions. I'm going to ask Hannah Land. Hannah?
Thanks very much, Vera. I work for the NHS in an acute hospital setting, so we've become familiar with the efforts to keep COVID at bay and deal with the challenges that the NHS is facing. I'm bracing myself for wave 1, 2 or 3 of COVID-19 to come our way, either in the next few weeks or months. And I wondered what key messages you would consider important to give to the general public, bearing in mind that COVID is probably going to be with us for months or years to come, and people need to live well in a pandemic season and recover well.
So I was dismayed about the government response from the very beginning. And I know we Liberal Democrats were quite careful, and I'm not the spokesperson, and I'm not the leader of the Liberal Democrats currently. And, you know, these sort of things obviously have to come from the leadership. But I would have been a lot more critical from the very beginning about the handling of the coronavirus crisis by the government. I believe it was a very right-wing response. They delayed locking down. They, for a long time, talked about herd immunity. They didn't take it seriously. If I looked at the Conservative counterparts in Parliament, they tried to brush that away. It was a bit like, if you're strong and healthy, you don't get affected. It's only the elderly and the vulnerable. And well, you know, that's a bit of collateral damage there, but we don't want to hurt the economy. And they delayed the lockdown for at least a week. They could have locked down a lot earlier, and we know that, of course, to control the virus when the infection number is low is much easier than when the infection number is high. So the whole of the response is then be to sort of have a knee-jerk reaction to locking down, and then we didn't have enough PPE, and I mean the whole of the chaos that the government has since demonstrated. And then, of course, I don't really want to publicly frighten everybody, because to some extent, people want to trust their government to do the right thing. But coming out of lockdown now, in, again, this sort of haphazard and slightly chaotic way, when I think we should start, coming out of lockdown, we should start with a much lower infection rate, I find it's complete folly. I was the only person today, or one of the few people who actually went into the chamber with a face mask, not to protect myself, but to protect others. This idea that we have a responsibility to not infect others because we don't really know whether we have it. I don't know whether I currently have the coronavirus because I've not been tested. So to treat this virus with the utmost respect. It's a deadly virus. It has killed a lot of people. I have the greatest respect for those people who work at the front line, and you know, I hope your mental health sort of sustains throughout this, because it must be quite difficult and very, very stressful to work in the hospital environment now. So I would say the utmost caution, being absolutely vigilant about where you find infection rates going up again, holding the government to account about its test, trace and isolate policy. Obviously, not scare the horses so much that people are getting very, very depressed. I understand that people are getting more and more gloomy, so we have to obviously look forward to the future. But we are not in a place, in my mind, currently, to get out of the lockdown. I think it's stupid what we've done in Parliament. We are setting completely the wrong signals. what does a bit of patience, since we have done this now for 2.5 months, another month or so of extreme caution, I think would have served us a lot better than rushing out of lockdown now. That's my general message. But good luck to you, and please keep safe. But since I say I'm particularly interested in mental health, I do understand also the mental health toll that this crisis is taking, and we need to pay attention to that afterwards. But don't come out of lockdown too early. That's what I'm most afraid of currently.
Thank you. Vera, last question before you perhaps want to say some closing remarks. Adam Carter goes to you for the last question, Adam.
Thanks, John. I've got 2 questions really, but my original one was regarding the so-called abandoning equidistance policy in terms of forming an alliance with the Labour Party. How would you see that working with particularly up in the Northern Mets in terms of council elections as well as parliamentary elections? And what role would you envisage giving local parties in that decision-making process? And the second part, or the second question, was regarding to your the stance on proportional representation, given the disastrous consequences it's had in local and regional government in Scotland and Wales by changing the rules from a position of relative strength ourselves. How do you see that proportional representation and changing the rules here would it promote and establish liberal democracy in England?
So I think I've tried to answer your first question before. You know, that we are overall as party and where our values are in the centre left doesn't mean that where we are facing the Labour Party we shouldn't compete with them. We do, and we do it well where we are particularly strong on local accountability, local democracy, local decision making. We are just better local councillors. So when it comes to local council elections, we need to defeat the Labour Party, don't get me wrong. In Labour facing seats, we want to defeat the Labour Party. So my Progressive Alliance is particularly when it comes to national government and the next general election, we need to get the Tories out. I mean, who doesn't want to defeat the Tories now? They're just a shit government. I mean, they really are for all of what we are standing for. So and I also believe that the threat to liberal values comes from the right. It does in this century. I mean, I grew up in Cold War Germany, and the threat to liberal values at the time came from Soviet Russia and Eastern Europe and communist regimes. But currently, if you look at the geopolitics, the threat to liberal democracies across the globe comes from the extreme right. And let's face it, this is a very extreme right government. Yet it's no more, no less. They're not cushy. They're not all nation Tories. They might call themselves that, but they are not. They're in their instinct very right wing, and we need to defeat them if we want to survive, if we want to keep our liberal values in this country alive, and everything that we believe in. So we need to defeat the Tories at the next general election. That doesn't mean that where we are Labour facing, we need to have, we need to also have it out with the Labour Party, and that is by distinguishing ourselves in the areas that I talked about. We are ultimately a pro-enterprise, pro-business party, pro-innovation, evidence-based, open and transparent, regulated business, but business. And the Labour Party continues to have this instinct of planned economy, and you know, they seem to believe that, you know, everything can be just done by the state. We don't. We are better at local democracy. I've just said that. You know, and we are better at civil liberties. You know, the Labour Party has got very authoritarian instincts. So we need to bring people with us who share our values of civil liberties, local democracy, but we need to do that, and social justice. But we need to do that from the centre left. That's where my values lie, and that's why I'm saying that. But your second question about proportional representation, I was on the council of the Electoral Reform Society, and I keep saying, please join the Electoral Reform Society or any of these bodies. And I very quickly became a council member of the Electoral Reform Society. So for 2 years, my heart beat with electoral reform. And the one thing that I would say about electoral reform, it's not just about the electoral success of one or the other party. It is about a better democracy. Proportional representation delivers better democracies. And yes, you could say, oh, in Scotland, currently, you know, the SNP is all dominant. And I hear it also, you know, I talked to some Austrians the other day, and they think that they can't defeat the right because of proportional representation. Wherever you look, where countries have delivered more progressive, more socially just societies, it is in countries with proportional representation. You can look at all the European countries, and, you know, the Scandinavian countries, Holland, Germany, and so on and so forth, where we are seeing a lot of division, polarization, and social injustice is in countries where you have got first past the post. And therefore, I still believe we need to get to proportional representation. Which form of proportional representation is a separate matter. I know that the Lib Dems are very hung up about STV. It doesn't have to be STV. It can be additional member system. It can be a number of proportional systems. But first past the post is not representative and disenfranchises a lot of voters. So we need to continue to fight for proportional representation.
Thank you for that, Vera. Vera, just before you say a few closing remarks, if you wish to, can I just, on behalf of everybody, thank you, because you've fielded actually such a large number of questions going across so many different fields. So I thought if I give my thanks first, it would just give you a time just to take a breath, at least, because you've really had very little time to take a breath tonight. So we really do want to thank you so much for giving this time to us, okay? I'm going to hand over to Vera just for some closing remarks, but just to say to you, I think perhaps if you all unmute, we could give her a little round of applause now. Okay, thank you. Right, if you all mute yourself, Vera, over to you. For those of you who wish to stay behind after Vera's left, if you want to talk about things you've heard tonight, the chat will remain open for a while later on. Over to you, Vera.
So first of all, thank you, because I believe in teams, I really do. I don't have all the answers. I have ideas, as you have obviously heard, but we deliver and develop a lot of things together. So I believe very much in dialogue and learning from each other. And it was absolutely fascinating to actually hear the questions. This format doesn't quite, is not quite a format for having a discussion, but you know, hopefully we will at some point as a party also create discussion spaces of how we can move forward. And I hope very much that what we did tonight was just an inspiration to start these discussions of where we need to go. And, you know, I certainly don't have all the answers, but together we can get there, and we need to absolutely win the next set of elections, wherever they are, locally or nationally. If you're interested in my leadership bit, I keep saying, please visit my website, werahobhouse.org, so www.werahobhouse.org.uk. I'm putting more ideas out there. You can sign up as a supporter or a volunteer, even if you want to be part of my campaign. You know, a big thank you to all of you again. Good luck for your next set of elections. I am an optimist. I think we can do it. We will do better. We'll probably not do it in a big bang thing. We are doing it by building and at a local level. I'm sure you're doing the right thing. Keep going. Never, never, never give up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You have a good night. Thank you, Vera.